Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Lunatics Radio Hour podcast. I'm Abby Brinker, sitting here with Allan Kudan.
Or are you?
Have you ever seen your own doppelganger?
No.
What would you do if you did?
I would have to evaluate if his life was better than mine, and if so, I would have to assimilate it.
Interesting.
So maybe I'm the doppelganger.
That's actually quite well-themed to some of the things we're going to talk about today.
I mean, sure. I mean, why wouldn't you want to just, slip into a better version of your own life?
But can you? Can you really?
I mean, with crime, you can do anything.
So today is part 2 of our what's turned out to be quite an epic deep dive into doppelgangers. Today we're going to focus on doppelgangers in pop culture. Last week we talked all about the history and the mythology, the actual belief and allegations of doppelgangers. Today it's going to be largely focused on horror and science fiction interpretations of that. But before we jump into that, I posted on Instagram this week and just asked if anybody out there had very interesting doppelganger experiences in their own life. And I was quite overwhelmed that a lot of people have. Also, I did a poll on Twitter, and 80% of people who responded said that they had seen their own doppelganger or somebody else's. And I know that could just be somebody that looks similar. But I think with doppelganger, it's one of those things where you're like, oh, I think that's Allan. And then you're like, oh, no, it's not Allan.
I think I can take a lot more away from these stories for people that don't live in places like New York City.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're surrounded by, what are we up to? 8 million, 9 million now?
Couldn't tell you.
There's only so many faces, right? And variations. But if you are somebody that lives way out in the woods with no other human in sight and standing, at the edge of your property every night at 2 a.m. is someone that looks just like you, then yeah, I'm gonna listen to your story.
Seems like you're referencing Us a little bit with that one.
Oh, the movie.
Yeah.
Perhaps subconsciously. But yeah, just walking through Times Square, seeing thousands of people, there's a good chance you're going to see someone with similar features.
Similar features, yeah, but there's a difference between someone that looks that close to you.
I'm also going to say that there is a rise in doppelganger sightings since the pandemic.
Why?
Because we see less of people's faces. You just see the eyes,
Oh, with masks on, you mean?
Yeah.
Sure.
And the brain interprets the rest of someone's features. It's the same reason why after they had this study about whether people are more attractive or less attractive when wearing masks, and the answer was more. And it's just because people's brain fills in the gaps.
Well, it's just because people like a good mystery. They want what they don't have. That's why people play games when you're dating. You don't text someone back, suddenly they're interesting to you. That's how you won me over.
I guess that's what it's all about, romantic manipulation.
All right, so let me share some of the personal experience doppelganger submissions I got on Instagram, just because I think they're fascinating.
Okay.
So one comes from our friend, also named Allan, a storied native on Instagram who is an awesome historian of New York City, especially Queens, but all of New York City. So he had friends back in high school who claimed to see them in their neighborhood. And then they would message him and be like, yo, I just saw you in, whatever street. And he'd be like, what the fuck? I'm home, today or whatever, or I'm not there. But this would happen to him all the time. And so this was a recurring thing until he graduated. Then he started this new job. And one of his coworkers currently looks super similar. And he sent me a photo of them together. And they do look like they could totally be doppelgangers.
Yeah, every so often I'll encounter these stories on Reddit.
Yeah.
Wow, yeah, you have a double that either works in the area or I just see him lurking around. Do you have a long lost twin or do you have a brother or anything? And the answer is no. And then eventually they'll run into each other and they'll be 100% identical. The example I'm thinking of is a big ginger bearded guy.
Yeah.
With a lot of very distinct features.
Mm-hmm.
And they happen to work in office buildings right by each other. And they're so they're wearing the same business casual type outfit, wearing the same exact everything, same haircut. And that's just weird.
Yeah, I wonder too if not that certain people are more distinct looking than others, but if for say you are somebody who's really tall, who has red hair, that you're just more likely because you're rare in a way that people are oh, that looks like this guy. If you know someone like that, then any other tall person with red hair, you're oh, it looks like Jimmy.
Right. If you have certain distinctive features.
Right. Our friend on Instagram, Nicole, also told us, so there was this sleazy guy who kept hitting on her throughout, I think some time, even though he had a girlfriend. And then eventually they were all at the same party and she ran into him, and her and his girlfriend looked identical. She said, like, even down to their mannerisms, their weight, their hair, like how they put, their clothing, like everything was so similar that it was like very, and I was like, whoa, can you imagine though, like running into somebody where it's like looking at yourself in 3D like that, like that just must be a really interesting way to see yourself.
Sure.
Even though obviously it's not you.
You ever been 3D scanned?
No, have you?
Of course.
For what?
A couple years ago, I was working on a movie about this guy that basically his whole life exists on the internet.
Yeah.
So there was like half the movie took place, quote unquote, in the internet because it was like an allegory for like where he spends his time.
Sure.
The whole movie was shot green screen. And, there's all these like memes coming to life and everything. They had to like build like a whole CG world that this guy was like walking through, right? And so they're using a bunch of like, models and cartoons and that sort of stuff. But they also did 3D scans of the entire crew.
Oh, cool.
And so like we're all just in the movie somewhere walking around in the background. They're just like, they map us to,
as like extras.
Yeah, like it's just like our image stretched over a 3D model. And it's like they're adding like the clothing, like the weird hats and everything. So it's like we are a billion different extras, just like, cool. Sprinkled throughout the movie.
I want to see you as a billion different extras. That sounds cool.
Yeah.
I didn't know this movie existed. And then finally, so our friend Hector from the Reshoot Movie podcast also told us that he had a doppelganger. And from a distance, his mom actually couldn't tell them apart, which I think is funny.
Mothers usually can't.
Yeah, mothers, they don't have a sense of what their kids look like.
Nope.
So in film and literature, doppelgangers function a bit differently than they do in real life. And when I say in real life, I'm referring to what we talked about in the last episode when it comes to mythology and belief systems and kind of this paranormal double. In fiction, that sometimes happens. It's usually used as more of a mechanic, a storytelling mechanic, and it can be a little bit different. For instance, in some cases, it's like less paranormal double and more psychological evil twin or something like that. And so for this episode, I kind of broke things down into categories of doppelgangers. And this is not, I'm sure, incredibly scientific, but I'm kind of attempting, instead of to walk through all of the examples of doppelgangers in literature and film chronologically, to kind of lump them into relevant categories.
Sure. I mean, yeah, there's a lot.
Yeah. So before we get into that, let's talk about today's sources, and then we'll jump into the meat of the episode.
Wikipedia.
No Wikipedia on today's list.
What?
Yeah.
You serious?
A lot of short stories, a lot of articles and films, but no Wikipedia today.
We've never not had Wikipedia.
That's
as a
not
source.
true.
It is true.
The first source is an article, Self as Other, the Doppelganger, by Guy Faurholt of Aahus University. The article can be found on doubledialogues.com. IMDB for general information about the films that we're going to discuss today. Edgar Allan Poe's The Story of William Wilson. An article by Terry Thompson from 1988. James's The Jolly Corner, The Explicator. A fandom.com entry on the Therered from Us. A Vox.com article by Emily St. James. Jordan Peele's Us and its ending explained, sort of. An article by Catherine Bowers, Gothic Doubling and the Double, Gothically. And I'll link the articles in the description so that you guys can find them easily. In Guy Faurholt's article, they outline the way this mechanic usually manifests in literature. Quoting from the doubledialogues.com article, quote, "The doppelganger is an uncanny motif comprising two distinct types. One, the alter ego, or identical double of a protagonist, who seems to be either a victim of an identity theft perpetuated by a mimicking supernatural presence, or a subject to a paranoid hallucination. Or two, the split personality, or dark half of the protagonist, an unleashed monster that acts as a physical manifestation of a dissociated part of the self." And I'm going to take those two types here and raise you a few of categories.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm just having like flashbacks to college of like taking really fun courses and they just put it in the most boring way possible.
Oh, I thought that was like a good explanation of the literary device. But yeah, you know us, we're not that.
It's very succinct,
highbrow.
I'll give you that, but come on.
So first we're going to start with I think maybe what is the most prolific category here of doppelgangers, and that's psychological thriller.
Sure.
So sometimes this genre is a literal twin. Sometimes it's an imagined twin. Sometimes the double isn't a twin at all. But nothing paranormal or supernatural is actually happening for the most part. The thing that's tying this category together in my mind is that the doppelganger is indeed psychological, or the effect of it is creating some kind of psychological distress on the protagonist.
What do you mean there's nothing supernatural happening, though? Hit me with a movie. What's a movie that...
Black Swan.
Black Swan, the one movie that we're going to talk about time and time again that I have not seen.
Right. So like in Us.
Okay, I've seen Us.
That's not psychological. Those doppelgangers exist according to the mythos of the film. They exist in flesh and blood.
Okay.
In Black Swan, they do not.
So how is that not supernatural, though?
In Black Swan? Because it's psychological. She's imagining it.
Oh, okay. So gotcha. It's just all in her head.
Right.
There's nothing happening tangibly.
Or an example could be there's a movie about twins, and one of those twins is evil and one is not evil, but it's not paranormal or supernatural. Two twins actually exist.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay. And it's like a psychological thriller, not because someone's imagining the other double, but just because that's the tone of the film.
I understand.
Okay. So a really good example that I don't think you've seen, but some people might have.
Black Swan.
Is Cronenberg's film Dead Ringers from 1988. I'll set the scene for you. Dead Ringers tells the story of two identical twins.
Okay.
We talked about this a bit on an episode with Sarah Quincy a few months ago about Cronenberg. But they're both played by Jeremy Irons, and it's about this like agonizing fall from social power. They're both doctors. And it's actually based on these creepy twins that lived on the Upper East Side in Manhattan many years ago.
This is a real story?
It's based on a real story, but then it becomes very Cronenberg-esque. This is one of my favorite Cronenberg films. Though this film would be categorized under evil twin films for sure, and not paranormal doubles, I do think it's worth mentioning because the film uses doppelgangers in like kind of a literary mechanic sense. So there is some foreshadowing that comes into this film with the fate of one of the twins. That it kind of like finds its way to one twin and then the other. And that's something, remember back to last episode when we talked about the foreshadowing of like Lincoln or Catherine the Great seeing their doppelganger right before death.
Okay.
So it's not one for one, but I'm just kind of calling back to that idea of foreshadowing.
Right. This is Jeremy Irons instead. Right.
Where sometimes something will happen to one twin and then inevitably to the other.
Big Jeremy Irons fans, by the way.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
You should watch this movie. You see him twice the whole time.
I just love his voice.
From just in general, or did he do like a narration of something that you like?
I love his voice in general, but he has done multiple audiobooks.
Cool. The connection between the twins and Dead Ringers does seem to sort of transcend typical human connection and dabble into something more ethereal. But again, I'm not categorizing this film as paranormal at all. It's psychological for sure. Another film that I'm a huge fan of and got to rewatch for this episode is Sisters from Brian De Palma. Sisters is from 1972, and it's, again, very near and dear to my heart. Please watch Sisters if you haven't seen it.
I have not seen Sisters.
It stars Margot Kidder and Jennifer Salt. And this film has like a ton of horror tropes, which is one of the reasons why I really like Brian De Palma's filmmaking.
Just give me the quick pitch. What's Sisters about? You literally just rolled up your sleeves.
The credits roll. No. So this film is brilliant. I don't want to give away too much, but the general quick pitch.
Yeah, give away nothing, please.
Is that you have two twins, or you have a set of twins.
Mm-hmm.
A guy starts sleeping with one of them.
Okay.
It kind of turns into her birthday. And we get a sense that like something...
Her birthday or their birthdays?
Their birthday. But like we don't see the other twin right away.
Okay.
But we start to get a sense that there's something's going on with her. Like she needs medication. He goes out, gets her meds, and he picks up a birthday cake for her.
Okay.
Brings it back. This is not giving away anything. This all happens in the first few minutes of the film.
Okay, birthday cake, copy.
He runs into the other twin, and she kills him.
Ugh.
But what happens is a neighbor who's like a reporter witnesses this from a window. It's very like Rear Window in some ways. Brian De Palma is like always calls on different like Hitchcockian sort of themes. But then it kind of becomes this slow unraveling of what the evil twin versus the good twin, how it all fits together. And again, it's like this psychological thriller of like kind of trying to understand what actually happened between them and what their connection is.
Okay, I follow.
So it kind of flirts with the line between evil twin and psychological doppelganger. And that's the question.
But there's no monsters.
No monsters.
Lame.
Wait, we're going to have a whole section on that. Just wait.
Better hurry up.
Another Brian De Palma film worth mentioning is Body Double from 1984, another film that I love. Both Body Double and Sisters have clear ties to Hitchcock, and he exploits these themes in like an updated and I think like refreshed way for the time period. These are both, from the 70s and 80s.
Okay, well, do you want to pitch this one too?
I think you would actually like Body Double more than Sisters. It's an erotic thriller.
Okay. As erotic as that mermaid movie?
In a way that I think you might like more.
What was that movie?
The Lure.
The Lure. Yeah, that was a great movie. Because when you say erotic thriller, that's what I picture.
This is like an 80s erotic thriller. I think it's quite erotic. I don't think
you've made that clear.
Okay.
They show their shoulders.
It's sexy. I think and it also has kind of a Rear Window vibe.
Okay, so we're back
and a Vertigo vibe. It's hard to talk about this film. I'll say this. Both Body Double and Vertigo, the doppelgangers act in the same way. And I'm just going to say that because I don't want to ruin all these films for people. But if you've seen one, then you understand the other.
Okay, but if you had to only watch one, say someone's really pressed for time and needs to watch a doppelganger movie.
Out of those two or out of all doppelganger movies?
Out of those two.
I would say if the idea of an erotic thriller sounds interesting to you, you should watch Body Double.
Right, because the one is an erotic thriller and one's not.
Correct.
That's a pretty clear choice then.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Great. Moving on.
And I don't mean it's like porn, but it's
right. I mean, well, they
sexy.
do show their shoulders.
Vertigo from 1958, a very, very classic Alfred Hitchcock horror film, Doppelganger. And that really, again, is squarely in this category of psychological because it's ultimately about like projection versus reality and delusion.
You just keep shaming me for not watching these movies, aren't you?
Yeah.
Okay, that's
welcome
cool.
welcome to the episode.
Yep.
Let's get this one out of the way because you haven't seen this one and I'm passionate about it.
I have at least seen parts of Vertigo.
No, I'm going to talk about Black Swan now.
Fuck.
What parts of Vertigo have you seen?
The Vertigo shots.
Oh, sure.
It's filmmaking 101.
Yeah. They should have showed you the whole movie.
Yeah, probably. I think I did watch the whole movie at one point. I don't know. Watching things in a classroom setting is not the most memorable.
It's funny. A lot of these I actually took if it wasn't clear, my obsession with Brian De Palma, it's because I took a class in film school just about him. And those films had a major impact on me.
Well, you just wait until we get to the Godzilla episode, and I'm going to shame you for not watching all those movies.
I've watched so many Godzilla movies with you.
Oh, have you?
So many more than I know that you've watched all of them. I've watched so many more than the normal person.
First off, I have not watched all of them.
You've watched a lot of them.
Okay.
What are there, like 50-something films?
53. But, Abby, what
Allan.
part of Godzilla glows right before he unleashes his atomic breath?
His spine.
That's correct. Not his eyes.
We were playing horror trivia the other day. I learned my lesson. Famously, Black Swan uses a doppelganger in a psychological sense. In 2010, Darren Aronofsky's Black Swan hit theaters, and it was an instant sensation. The screenplay was written by Mark Hyman, Andres Hines, and John J. McLaughlin. The film stars Natalie Portman and Mila Kunis, both exceptionally talented in this movie, and there's so much to say about it in general, let alone just its use of doppelgangers. So, to give you, Allan, and any viewers who have not seen it, Black Swan takes the classic tale of Swan Lake, which is a ballet, and it uses the actors. So the characters in the film are putting on a production of Swan Lake at like the New York City Ballet.
Okay.
So the stakes are high. It's a very high pressure situation, very kind of like toxic art scene, where you have this like male, brilliant ballet director that everybody is like bending over backwards to impress and be chosen as the queen swan. That's the kind of vibe of the movie. But what Aronofsky also does is through these characters who are putting on Swan Lake, they, in their own stories that we see, also act out Swan Lake, kind of in the back end of it.
I have not seen Black Swan.
Yep.
This is established.
Yeah.
However, I do have one Black Swan anecdote.
Okay.
I did work on the College Humor sketch about Black Swan starring Darren Aronofsky.
Tell us everything.
I actually don't remember much about it because this was like over a decade ago because, College Humor was still around. But I just remember him being very, very kind.
Oh, that's great. Sometimes you meet these directors and you're like, oh, dreams are shattered.
Actually, no, he was very nice to me and the camera guy, and he was a total dick to the director.
That tracks.
Now that I'm thinking about that, it was pretty amusing.
So I will say this. This film does flirt with the idea of paranormal versus psychological versus sabotage. The main character, Nina, a role that Natalie Portman won the Oscar for, she sees visions of a darker version of herself, something that she's striving to unlock. So Nina, Natalie Portman, is playing this very kind of timid perfectionist person. And in this role of the Swan Queen, she has to be both the white swan and the black swan. So the director, the whole film is being like, you need to figure out how to unwind, how to unleash, how to let go of like all of the perfectionism you're carrying and just like go wild. And of course he does this in like super problematic ways by like forcing himself on her multiple times.
Oh, this is not good.
But she's like this technically perfect dancer, but she lacks this like seduction and ferocity that he's looking for in this role.
I was going to say, like, just have her like take like a crazy wine and painting class, you know?
But as she's obviously starting to kind of crack under all this pressure, these visions come where she's seeing this dark version of herself, and they're coupled with like these violent outbursts as she's gaslit and she's tortured by this director. It's an intense film. The pressure mounts as the other dancers turn against her. So I also want to talk about Mila Kunis's character, Lily.
Okay.
Who's like this new girl. She's super cool. She like smokes cigarettes. She doesn't give a shit about nothing.
She's cool and smokes cigarettes.
I don't support smoking cigarettes, but that's how the film portrays her. She's like very in touch with her sexuality. She has no trouble letting loose. Like one night she like takes Nina out and like gives her ecstasy for the first time. That's like her vibe. She just doesn't like care. And then we realize like partway through the film that we can't trust the version of Lily that we see.
Are you giving this entire movie away?
No, because we're seeing it through Nina's eyes. So we start to understand. I'm just trying to explain why this is psychological. We start to understand that at least some of the things that we're seeing are in Nina's brain.
Yeah, no, I got that.
Versus, okay, great. But overall, the film is really like this exploration of mental illness, toxic environments, and I think it tells a really important story. It highlights like the difficulties of performing at this kind of level with like this ambition and this audience and the pressure. And again, it kind of like has this really gross director character who is a quote unquote artistic genius. And that's why he's allowed to get away with being an absolute predator.
Mm-hmm.
But at its core, there's also a lot about Nina's own history with mental illness. And I think that the film is actually a raw look at that and how all of that manifests and the effects of pressure and control and being gaslit.
Is Darren Aronofsky still making stuff?
He is, yeah. But he makes stuff kind of slowly. Like he puts something out every, 5 years or something.
Like I can't name another.
Mother with Jennifer Lawrence. I think that might have been his last like big one.
Mother. That's different from Ma, right?
Yeah.
That wasn't Darren Aronofsky?
No.
Can you name another one?
Did you ever see Pi?
Oh, yeah.
That was him.
I've seen that movie. That's a weird movie.
Yeah, all his shit is weird.
Are there any doppelgangers in that movie?
The Whale came out this year with your favorite guy.
The Whale, that's true.
Yeah.
Not my favorite guy, everyone's favorite guy.
Brendan Fraser, yeah. And it sounds like he's in post-production of something right now. But so yeah, he's still out there. I went to, before college, before my parents kind of like agreed to let me go to a film program for school, they sent me to this really amazing program in Maine for a few weeks called the Maine Media Workshops. And
Did you learn how to operate a Steadicam?
They do like official Steadicam courses there.
I am aware.
Oh, but it's really cool. They have like programs for adult filmmakers, for college age, for photographers, for all different kinds of like technical processes. And it was a very, very transformative and important experience for me. It was like so helpful technically to learn about so many different things on a film set before I even got to college. But the point is, in this experience, I've met friends that I absolutely loved, and I met this one guy that I hated. He was just like another guy in my program, like another kid, and
Sounds like a jerk.
He was just so obnoxious and pretentious, and all he cared about was Darren Aronofsky.
Yeah,
so from that, I was
school.
like, ugh, this guy is like, I will never watch Darren Aronofsky if this is what this guy likes. But now I like him quite a bit.
That's literally the film school experience.
Yeah, Requiem for a Dream. It's like those kind of movies. It's like film school movies that he makes.
Yeah, you fucking hate him because there's always that one guy that has this massive encyclopedic knowledge. And when you voice your opinion about something, he just explains to you why you're wrong.
It's actually why, despite all of the discussion of film that we do, I don't like talking about art or film or whatever, TV with people a lot, because it ends up being exactly what you're saying, that people's opinions are fact when they forget that it's art. And everyone can interpret that art in a different way. And I find it very obnoxious the way that some of these conversations come out, where everybody's like, well, no, this is why this is a good movie. And if you like this movie, if you don't like this movie, you're stupid. Or if you do like this movie, it's like, it's that kind of sense.
Yeah. I can't tell you how turned off I got having those conversations because, there I was in film school and it's like, oh, so what's your favorite movie? And we're getting answers, like Buffalo 66, Citizen Kane, just like, and I'm like, I like Terminator 2, which is a cinematic masterpiece.
Yeah.
I stand by it as quite possibly one of the best movies ever made.
I think everybody's own lived experiences and interests totally paints your interest in all of this. And it's just obnoxious to talk to people about it who are not open-minded. That's all. Rant over. But I do like Black Swan. I do like Darren Aronofsky as a director. And if you haven't seen it, it's a very, very good example of a psychological doppelganger film.
Yeah, I haven't seen it. Man, now I'm just like reliving the trauma of trying to defend my opinions about movies I like. Just because I didn't resonate with Midnight Cowboy, I would get shamed.
Well, now we can have this podcast to get our revenge on all of the film school.
Listen, Midnight Cowboy is not a bad. It's a good movie.
I don't think I've seen it.
It's fun, but I missed a lot of the undertones,
Yeah.
And if you miss the undertones, you're a fucking idiot.
Or maybe that director didn't do a good enough job.
No, it's actually a great movie. So you've never seen Midnight Cowboy?
No. Is it a Western?
No. Yeah, it's about a male sex worker. Well, he just wants to become a male sex worker, so he just goes to the big city to do that.
Cool.
Yeah. And there's, things where he just starts flirting with, older women to try to pick up clients. But the women just think that they're being hit on, and conflict ensues when he asks for payment.
Right.
It's a lot of societal commentary, but it's a fun movie.
Yeah. Cool.
What's his name? Dustin Hoffman's in it.
Oh, cool.
As a little Weasley guy.
That's usually his character.
Yeah, his character is named Ratso Rizzo, if that doesn't quantify his character type.
So more of a rat than a weasel.
Yeah, that's the movie where Dustin Hoffman goes, "Hey, I'm walking here."
Gotcha. Iconic.
Yeah, another classic example of filmmaking. Improv line, actually. A taxi cab ran the barricade because they had a blocked off street and a taxi just burst through and almost hit Dustin Hoffman. And so he just slaps the hood and says, "Hey, I'm walking here." But that the car wasn't even supposed to be in the movie.
Parodied excellently by Sandra Bullock in Miss Congeniality.
Another cinematic masterpiece.
I agree.
Okay, sorry for derailing our Doppelganger episodes talking about Midnight Cowboy.
Yeah, no doubles in Midnight Cowboy, I assume.
It's been a while since I've seen it, but I don't remember anything like that.
Then let's talk about science fiction doppelganger films.
Okay.
But I do want to be clear, because obviously there is a very fine line between cloning and science fiction doppelgangers. I'm not talking about cloning.
Why? I think that counts.
Well, I already put together the research in a way that excluded it.
Okay, well, I'm going to make a strong asterisk saying cloning counts.
Why do you think cloning counts?
That's what I believe.
I'm going to say why I don't think it counts.
Okay, and I'll lobby why it does.
Because a clone is a copy of somebody versus, so it's kind of the same person. Versus, in a lot of cases, doppelgangers are a different version of that person, like an evil version or a successful version or whatever. But a clone is a carbon copy. It's just having the same person multiple times.
Have you seen The Sixth Day?
No.
Starring the world famous Arnold Schwarzenegger.
I thought you were going to say The Rock. No, I have not.
Fantastic film, all about cloning. So this takes place in the slightly distant future.
Okay.
Where human cloning is illegal, but cloning as a technology exists. In fact, you can go to a repet facility to get your pet renewed, if you would.
That's cute.
Yeah, that's how the movie kind of opens, right? because he's like replacing their family dog.
Oh.
But then Arnold comes back to see his family with a man that looks just like him. Ooh. That sounds like Doppelganger, right?
But it's a carbon copy.
Yes, but there's a lot that goes on with this film. There's lots of nefarious plans, corporate espionage. There's, it's an action movie.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of psychological elements behind it. First off, just the crazy psychological head trip of walking into your home and seeing yourself there with your family.
Yeah.
That's bad.
Yeah.
Right?
I concede. Yeah.
So there you go. That's very much a cloning movie, but doppelgangers.
I'm also going to say this very vague comment that there's a film in theaters right now that I loved that is about cloning, but I am not talking about it because I don't want to spoil it for anybody. But just know how hard it is for me not to talk about it because it's so timely to this episode. But it's cloning, not doppelgangers.
Okay, I'm just going to spoil it for you. You're talking about Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania.
Good guess, but no.
There's a whole sequence where he just keeps... There's so many duplicates of himself because due to like the timeline keeps splitting into different probabilities that there's just so many versions of himself, all slight differences.
Again, I don't think that's a doppelganger if they exist on different timelines.
They're all in the same room.
Okay. Well, I haven't seen that movie. That's not the movie I was talking about.
One even works for Baskin Robbins. That's like I don't know. They paid a lot for branding.
Okay, so one film that I'm not going to talk about, but just as an example, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which has a ton of different versions. It's been retold before. It often appears on doppelganger film lists when you look up, best doppelganger films, but it would fall under the category of cloning, I believe. But an example of a science fiction film, I think, and I'm curious what your thoughts are, that is strictly about doppelgangers is Jordan Peele's Us from 2019.
I have seen this movie.
We just watched it.
Yes, we rented the DVD from the library. It's almost impossible to talk about this movie without spoiling things.
Yeah, so skip ahead like 5 minutes if you haven't seen it and you want to.
Maybe 10 just to be safe. Who knows how long we're going to
talk about. Just go pause
and
watch it and come back.
Yes.
Beyond being my preferred mix of horror and comedy, which I love, Us explores this deep psychological question with the use of doubles, or in this case, the tethered, which is what the doppelgangers are called.
Hold the phone.
Yes.
You found this movie funny?
Yeah. You kidding me? The whole Elizabeth Moss.
Who's Elizabeth Moss?
The White Family with Ophelia and play Call the Police, and it plays Fuck the Police. I think it's very funny.
Oh, yes, that was a humorous sequence.
Yeah, there's I think the whole dad is funny. There's like a vibe to it, a funny vibe.
When I think of horror comedy, I think of like Scary Movie.
I'm not thinking of horror parody. I'm thinking of horror comedy.
Or, like Evil Dead 3.
Right.
Where it's mostly a comedy with some horrific elements.
You and I have different definitions.
That we do.
So quoting from fandom.com here, just to help us define the role of doppelgangers in this movie. Quote, "The Tethered are an antagonistic race of doppelgangers in Jordan Peele's 2019 horror film, Us. The Tethered were made by humans and were originally meant to control their surface counterparts. However, it failed, and the Tethered were abandoned. For generations, the Tethered copied their surface counterparts. Whatever they did as well, except in a more horrific and strange way." There's this scene at the end, the final scene, where Lupita is with herself, right, with her double.
Mm-hmm.
It's at that point that she reveals kind of the impetus of the Tethered and how they came to be, and that they were this government experiment as a way to control the living people, like as puppets. They would manipulate them on the underground side and control their actions on the above ground side. And that the experiment failed, but now all of these generations of people were abandoned.
It almost sounded like using clones with a weird relationship with quantum entanglement.
Right.
Where with whatever one does, the other does as well.
Right.
It seemed, though, that it was because maybe that's why it was a failed experiment. It was just kind of the other way around, where whatever they did upstairs, whatever the real people did, the doppelgangers had to do instead.
Right. Yeah, which is, there's like what the scene where they're all meeting for the first time and they're talking about like giving birth and having C-sections. And you're like, damn, that's fucking heavy.
Yeah, that was terrifying.
I'm going to quote from the Vox.com article by Emily St. James, because I think she really explains the nature of this film in a great way.
Okay.
Quote, its central metaphor of meeting a literal twin of yourself certainly can be read as a commentary on race, but it's also a pretty brilliant commentary on class, on capitalism, on gender, and on the lasting effects of trauma or mental illness. You can probably add your own possibilities to this list. All of these concepts keep informing one another. If you want to read what happens to Red and Adelaide as a commentary on how differently traumatic incidents weigh on children of means versus children who grew up with little money, doing so can support both an interpretation of the film as being about mental illness and one where it's about class. What's more, Us doesn't seem to want to be read as social commentary in the way Get Out was. The middle hour is so fun precisely because it never really bothers to stop and make you think about the movie's deeper themes. It's too busy killing off tethers by chewing them up in a boat's motor. End quote.
I did appreciate what you said while we were watching the movie.
What did I say?
That the only real racial commentary in the film was how fast the white family dies.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's more, but to me that was just so funny that the white family is immediately killed by their doppelgangers. They really had no fair fight in them.
They had none.
They were so stupid.
Mm-hmm. I got to pull in the reins here because I'm not trying to just like give a movie review. In terms of the doppelgangers, I really loved the mythos. I wish they explained the world a little bit more. I kind of want to like see the prequel movie now.
Sure.
Of like the founding of the Therered. Also, how the hell did they survive down there for so long? Do they
Eating rabbits.
Eating rabbits.
And the rabbits obviously multiply.
Got it. How'd
Yeah.
they feed the rabbits though?
That I don't know.
It can't be a sealed ecosystem. That's crazy.
Maybe the rabbits eat the dead bodies of the tethered when they die.
Damn, that's amazing. Okay, I mean, yeah, all these questions are just because I found the world so interesting.
I hope someday you get a prequel to this movie.
Or a sequel. I'm fine with either.
I hope we get an expanded view into the world.
The Tetherverse.
Yeah, there you go.
Or just start combining the movies where we start seeing tethered versions of the aliens from Nope.
There you go.
That'd be nuts.
Another example of a science fiction doppelganger film is the film Doppelganger from 1993.
Oh, here we go.
Starring Drew Barrymore, Doppelganger is a fairly poorly rated movie, but it certainly, I would say, is fun to watch with a group. Drew's murderous doppelganger makes us think that she's psychological for a large portion of the film, but the ending reveals what the double actually is. And it's totally bizarre and unique to this movie. I don't think any of the other doppelganger films that we've seen are like this at all.
Something about it was familiar, of like a version of yourself literally ripping apart from yourself to go do mischievous things.
But do you remember what was like inside the doppelganger?
Bones?
No, it was like a monster kind of.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying. It was like literally flesh would rip out of Drew Barrymore,
Yeah.
form into a person, go do bad shit, and come back.
Yeah.
I've seen this trope somewhere else, and I cannot remember where. Where it's just like the little evil part of you that goes and does bad things. Did it ever explain where it came from or why she can do that?
I don't think so. And like technically, is it paranormal? Like I'm putting it in science fiction because it's not a haunting. It's actually a thing that is happening in the world of this movie.
I'd put that. I mean, it takes the ending where we actually see that all happen takes place in a church.
I think it's it's her
possession?
old house. It's not a church.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's like the house that she lived in LA.
Beautiful house.
Well, yeah, it was like a Gothic manor.
It I don't know. The closest approximation of that is like when you see like little Voldemort living in the back of Quirrell's head or whatever his name is, where it's just like a little thing that can like come out and do bad things.
There's also another film that does that as well. Spoiler. Malignant by James Wan.
Yes, that's the movie. That's the movie I'm thinking of.
Oh, okay.
Malignant.
Yeah.
100% that's the movie I'm trying to think of.
Which I also purposely didn't include because...
Why? That's perfect.
That was a conjoined twin. That it was like a cyst that, it was that kind of a thing.
We are splitting hairs
I
here.
know, but if you don't, then this world of this episode would be like 45 hours long. There's so much to talk about.
Of course. It's like...
We need some barriers to this.
I refuse. No, Malignant is the example that I was thinking of.
Okay.
It is the perfect example of like the evil version of yourself.
Yeah.
Because they were literally identical twins. And one was evil and one was not. One also had superpowers.
Talking about evil versions of yourself, of course, spanning both cinema and literature, are our dear old friends, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
This is a doppelganger?
If you think all of the other, you just went on a rant about how big this world of doppelgangers should be, but this is outside your boundary?
Yes, because they don't look like each other.
But they are the same person.
The visual likeness is a key component of the doppelgangerverse.
They look somewhat like each other.
Only in that movie with, what's his name?
John Malkovich?
With John Malkovich, yeah. Where it's literally John Malkovich with a different wig on. And they're like, wow, those guys look nothing alike.
Okay. Well, we extensively covered Jekyll and Hyde in October of last year. We did a whole series on Jekyll and Hyde. So you can listen to that there. I think if we're talking about things so broadly, it's worth mentioning. Because and the reason why I put it in science fiction is because it's a serum that forces the change to happen.
In my mind, the quintessential version of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, as we discussed, is from A League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. And they look, it's basically just like the Hulk. Would you say that Bruce Banner and the Hulk have a doppelganger relationship?
No. It's split personality.
Split personality. I would like to argue that Jekyll and Hyde are the same.
Okay. I concede again.
Thank you.
One double that is based in science fiction but has psychological implications, and I think you're going to take issue with this as well.
Oh, here we go.
Is Frankenstein's monster.
What?
Not clearly a doppelganger, perhaps, but a literary device that Mary Shelley was using to hold up a mirror to force our characters to reflect upon their own lives, which is kind of the same function of a doppelganger in literature. I'm going to quote here from Catherine Bowers. Quote,
I'm giving you a real skeptical look for all those who can't see.
Quote, Punter uses the examples of Robert Louis Stevenson's The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray to showcase the double type. In both cases, the double figures, the violent, monstrous Hyde and Dorian's decaying, aging self-portrait, reveal the horrors apparent when the self is physically divided. Jekyll's goodness is offset by Hyde's murderous tendencies, just as Dorian's external beauty contrasts with the internal decay and degeneration represented in his portrait, end quote. It's to me, I understand that it's one person, but it also is kind of the same idea of an evil twin. You have one that's the evil version and one that's the good version, and together they make up a whole. So whether those two things are physically split or not, it's similar in that way. You have someone who's really evil, someone who's really good, someone who's really this, someone who's really that. Together, they're a balanced being.
I'm getting flashbacks to high school this time when being forced to write an essay on like, tell us why the author intended this. And I'm like, I don't see it. I don't see it at all.
You don't see that?
I mean, I understand what you're saying. I just don't see any relationship to doppelgangers outside of unless we're talking simply a duality of a split person.
Well, I'm just talking about taking a step back. Why doppelgangers are used in film and in literature, what the purpose is. And the purpose is usually similar to what we see with these examples.
Right. It's the person usually without the same filters.
Right.
And just by adjusting the filters, it makes a completely different, usually evil person.
It all comes back to human nature at the end of the day.
Doesn't it always?
The final example of doppelgangers in science fiction is Annihilation.
The final?
That I'm going to talk about.
Okay.
The film came out in 2018, based on a novel from 2014, written by Jeff Vandermeer. Again, it's hard to talk about these things without spoiling them, but I will just say that the use of doppelgangers here mimics us in a lot of ways.
Okay. Mimics us as society? Or
The
mimics
film.
us, the 2019 movie.
Yeah, which caused a lot of chaos at the library when I was trying to explain that I needed the DVD of Us.
Yeah, no, I can see that. Well, you brought up a really good point of you got to draw the line somewhere. So, because one very doppelganger-y trope that I don't want to touch on simply because it belongs in a different episode is when you start doing time travel shenanigans. And so it's literally you from either the past or the future you're trying to stop yourself from doing something or trying to make something happen, and it's just causing all sorts of chaos. Or like any kind of like crime thriller that involves time travel.
Well, we have a time travel series coming up very, very shortly.
We do?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So yeah, I won't go too deep into this. But
that's different because that's your literal self. That's like Back to the Future. It's not a different version of you. It is you.
Yes, but like now we get philosophical of like what makes you you. That person has had slightly different experiences. That person has slightly different memories.
Or just slightly more or less memories.
Right, but also what version of time travel are we talking about? You know, is it like we're with one continuous timeline? Is it that this person is not going to only exists in this timeline? Are you actually that person? You know, like where do you draw the line? So it gets doppelgangery because again, you're having like the weird thing of seeing yourself do things or having to stop yourself from doing things.
We'll get to it all very soon.
Yep.
Good teaser there. Interestingly, I found a lot of the literary uses of doppelgangers, that I want to highlight at least, fall under the paranormal category. Less so films, but more so a lot of like Victorian era ghost stories, for instance, use doppelgangers in a paranormal, strictly paranormal way.
Sure.
Which is more kind of in line with the way we talked about them in the last episode, versus a lot of the film adaptations are, you know, psychological, science fiction, all the things that we've talked about so far.
Mm-hmm.
The Jolly Corner by Henry James, the namesake of our cat, was first published in December of 1908, and it appeared in the English Review. It is indeed a ghost story. The Jolly Double tells the story of a protagonist who returns to his now empty childhood home and begins to frequent it at night in the hopes of running into his own ghostly double. Quoting from the article by Terry Thompson, quote, "The idea of characters encountering their doppelgangers, identical or nearly identical versions of themselves, is probably as old as storytelling itself. From Artemis to her shadowy other Hecate, to Dr. Jekyll and his alter ego, Mr. Hyde, readers have long been intrigued by the prospect of a man or a woman meeting a ghostly double, especially if that strange other self is somehow evil, supernatural, or at least a bit sinister. In the Jolly Corner, one of the last stories that Henry James wrote, the author created an elegant, brooding doppelganger tale, certainly one of the most compelling in all of American literature," end quote. One exciting adaptation of this, because I think it is less known, but for anyone who has seen the series The Haunting of Bly Manor, which I did watch.
Did I watch that?
No, I don't think so.
What did I watch?
Hill House.
Yes.
Which is similar, but in Bly Manor, there is an episode called The Jolly Corner, which the director is actually based on the plot of this, which I would have totally had no sense of the inspiration behind it until I saw this.
I see.
So if anyone's seen that, they might have some sense of this short story.
Got it.
There's also a story called The Poor Clare by Elizabeth Gaskell. In 1856, Gaskell's The Poor Clare was first released as a serial. Interestingly, it was actually published in a magazine that Charles Dickens ran called Household Words. The Poor Clare is another Victorian ghost story that brings us into the world of a young woman who is being cursed by her grandmother. And I know these examples, again, are things that we're less familiar with. So the reason I wanted to highlight these is because I wanted to show the way that this doppelganger motif seems to function in this literature from this era versus the way it kind of functions in a lot of the more modern films.
Makes sense.
But I don't expect us all to be super familiar with these stories, but they're all accessible public domain short stories that you can go find online and read for free.
Maybe we'll have one of those in our Lunatics Library episode.
We actually have very modern doppelganger stories for our Lunatics Library for this, which I'm very, very excited about.
So you might say we're giving you the cutting edge of fiction.
There you go. So there's this final kind of wishy-washy Abbey category that I want to leave you with.
Women's studies.
Some may argue that some of these are paranormal or psychological in nature, but for some reason they feel different than the implementations that we've already discussed. So I'm calling this just so. Like someone who just meets someone who looks like them. You know, there's no grand explanation or twist ending. We can assume the author is making a point, a metaphor, but there's no clear indication that the double is ghostly or hallucinated or anything else. It's just simply part of the story.
That sounds boring.
Well, buckle up. And I will acknowledge that some of these, it might just be the case that I don't know the story intimately enough to categorize it properly, but let's just give me the benefit of the doubt here.
Okay.
Quoting again from Guy Faurholt's article.
Mm-hmm.
The central premise of the doppelganger motif poses the paradox of encountering oneself as another. The logically impossible notion that I and the not I are somehow identical. Originating in the German Schauerroman and the British Gothic novel, the doppelganger, like the vampire, was a product of early 19th century fascination with folklore, derived from the superstitious belief that seeing one's double is an omen of death. The doppelganger motif fuses supernatural horror with a psychological enquiry concerning personal identity and a psychological investigation into the hidden depths of the human psyche. End quote. William Wilson by Edgar Allan Poe was first released in 1839, and then again a year later within his short story collection, The Grotesque and the Arabesque. This is a great example of a just so doppelganger because it highlights this motif that we see often where it's like getting advice from yourself. It's kind of like what you said at the beginning. Like,
what was that?
Like trying to make a better version of yourself, or if you encounter a doppelganger that has like a better version of your life.
Yeah. In The Sixth Day, there is a amazing scene where someone's all like fucked up, right? And goes through a last minute cloning process so that he doesn't die.
Okay.
Because the way the cloning thing works is there's like a little light flashy thing that like, you know, does a quick download of your consciousness. And then they just put it into a blank. And then the blank instantly matures, you know, not instantly, but very quickly. Then the new guy wakes up and the old guy is like, wait, you're not even going to wait until I'm dead? And he says, would you? And then goes on.
Yeah, because, I mean, that's interesting because it's highlighting that the double has its own, it's not just a copy, right? It has its own motivations and...
Well, actually, it's...
I know that saying, would you, whatever you would do, I would do. But it's also saying that, like, I'm not going to respect you and fall in line.
Right, because, like, I'm not you. I'm the new version.
It's like robots rebelling.
Sure.
Yeah. So I'm going to quote from William Wilson itself here. So Edgar Allan Poe's words. Quote, I have already spoken of how he seemed to think he was better and wiser than I. He would try to guide me. He would often try to stop me from doing things I had planned. He would tell me what I should and should not do. And he would do this not openly, but in a word or two, in which I had to look for the meaning. As I grew older, I wanted less and less to listen to him. As it was, I could not be happy under his eyes. That always watched me. Every day, I showed more and more openly that I did not want to listen to anything he told me. I have said that, in the first years when we were in school together, my feelings might easily have been turned into friendship. But in the later months, although he talked to me less often then, I almost hated him. End quote.
Yeah, no one likes a fucking know-it-all.
One of the earliest examples of doppelganger in film history, if not the earliest, is a film from 1913 called The Student of Prague. This film is somewhat based on the story that we just discussed by Edgar Allan Poe, William Wilson.
When was Poe from?
1800s.
1800s.
That story was from 1839, I think.
Gotcha. Yeah. I don't know. His stuff feels so much more contemporary.
You can actually watch this film in its entirety on its Wikipedia page. It's like totally embedded within it. So if anyone wants to, it's a silent film. It's not super easy to watch.
So you don't even need headphones.
Yeah. But it's considered the first German art film and was this really essential film to history in that region because it elevated film locally.
Sure.
And kind of turned film into something different in Germany. So it's often kind of referenced in a lot of things. One thing I also want to highlight in this section is that there is a type of Gothic horror trope specific to doppelgangers called the Gothic double.
Interesting. Go on.
A lot of the short stories and novels that we've referenced so far were actually from an era of Gothic literature, which would make their doubles Gothic doubles.
Makes sense.
The first instance of this is from a novel called Siebenkäse, or Seven Cheese, by Johann Paul Richter, published in 1796. Siebenkäse. The novel tells the story of a man who seeks guidance from a friend, who turns out to be his doppelganger and advises him to fake his own death.
This was brought to my attention as the first example of doppelgangers in literature.
Yeah, exactly.
Stebenkost? How do you say it?
Siebenkoss.
Siebenkost.
Who brought this to your attention?
Avi Dobkin from the Alpha to Z podcast.
That tracks.
I actually tracked down a copy of this book, but with lots of classic literature, I prefer to do it on audiobook.
Yeah.
Just so I don't have to deal with the
old-timey language.
It just makes it more accessible.
Yeah.
But I could only find the German version in recorded format.
Oh.
So I have it in hard copy now.
Oh, you do?
But I totally forgot about it because I picked it up whenever we decided to do this topic, which was a while ago. And here we are, just reminded about Siebenkost or whatever it is.
We'll convince Avi to translate it and record an audiobook version for us.
Hang on. I want to... The full title of this is ridiculous.
Yeah, I absolutely couldn't pronounce it, so I didn't try.
Okay, so the full title of Siebenkost. I mean, there's a long bit of German that I'm not going to read. So Siebenkost itself means 7 cheese.
Yep.
But that's a proper noun within the title. And the full title is Flower, Fruit, and Thorn Pieces, or The Married Life, Death, and Wedding of the Public Defender F. St. Siebenkost in Richtermarkflaken, Kuppenschnappel.
There you go.
Sorry for my German, everybody. But yeah, I mean, it sounds like a real page turner. One last note on Siebenkost. That's where we get the word doppelganger. So on the Wikipedia trivia page, and that's...
Wikipedia trivia?
Yeah, the Wikipedia trivia page. This is where I get all my information.
Okay.
Siebenkost is the first novel in which a lookalike is described as a doppelganger, which is obviously a very German word.
Yep.
It is a word of Jean Paul's own invention, slightly spelled differently originally.
Got it. There you go. And then again, which we talked about in last episode, Katherine Crow took that word from this novel and applied it to this paranormal book that she wrote, which kind of put it into the zeitgeist as this paranormal term.
Yeah, so I guess Jean Paul, who is the author of Siebenkost, is the father of the doppelganger.
There you go. It's kind of an interesting history because it's like our terminology for it came from fiction, but it adapted itself to describe something that's existed for thousands of years. It's kind of interesting the way it all came about here.
Yeah, but also just like leave it to the Germans to give a very, very specific word to something.
Sure. Other examples of Gothic doubles can be found in The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson.
You don't say.
Along with Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre, one of my favorite authors of all time, and read Villette if you haven't.
You won't even let me read it.
What do you mean? It's sitting on my shelf for 5 years.
Every time I ask to borrow it, you hit me.
The Double by Dostoevsky was first published in 1846. The plot of The Double is somewhat similar in some ways to the film we started talking about today, Dead Ringers.
The Sixth Day.
No, Dead Ringers. It doesn't deal with twins, but it's the story of one man who meets his double, and there's kind of this power struggle between them that emerges. One has all the charm, the other is less social. You get it. Quoting again from Catherine Bowers, quote, "In Dostoevsky's text, the double appears after a metaphorical death. This progression is a mere image of a common 19th century spiritualist belief about doppelgangers, that the double's appearance is an ill omen that often prefigures death. The reasoning behind it, taken from folklore, is that the spirit world and the living world coexist, always hidden from each other. But before death, the barrier between them opens. For example, in Prometheus Unbound from 1820, Percy Bysshe Shelley describes the priest Zoroaster encountering his own double, an apparition from the shadow world visible only to him. The double is a mirrored reflection of the living individual in the land of the dead. It appears to the other half in life just before death comes," which we talked about. Remember, we quoted from Percy from
Jackson.
From Shelley's poem in the last episode, because I really like his version, which again are based on his own. He had experiences with, claimed experiences with a doppelganger.
Percy Shelley.
Yeah, but the
less famous Shelley.
But he painted this picture in Prometheus Unbound about, like, very similar to us in a way, like this shadow world post-death and this living world, and then right before death it opens up and you meet your other half.
Wait, Percy Shelley wrote Prometheus Unbound?
Yeah.
You've read Some of it, right?
Parts of it. We all did last episode.
Right. That's when we talked about this. I don't know. I really want to read it. I can't stand I love the content. It just sounds so cool. It's going to be so inaccessible.
Have Avi read it for you.
Okay, so for the Lunatics Library episode, we're just going to have Avi read all of Prometheus Unbound to us.
There you go. So we're talking about The Double by Dostoevsky, right? There's actually a 2013 film version, super accessible.
Sure.
But it stars Jesse Eisenberg, who I know you don't like.
Come on. I hate that guy.
And there's also a famous movie, The Machinist from 2004, starring Christian Bale.
I've seen this.
That is also inspired by this movie.
Really?
By this novel, yeah.
There's a double in that movie?
It might not be one for one, but it's somehow. I haven't seen The Machinist, but...
I mean, it's been a while. I just remember him being so freaking skinny.
Well, that's why it's famous, because he went from that to Batman, and it was like the biggest weight change for consecutive film roles ever.
Wow.
Yeah. A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens was first published in 1859. Set in both London and Paris, this famous novel tells the story of a man released from prison to care for his child. Full disclosure, I've not read this novel, but it's a very important historical novel that many, many people really love. So calling that out here.
It was the best of novels. It was the worst of novels.
On the film side, the final thing I'm going to talk about, Possession from 1981.
A fantastic film.
Funny timing, because we actually have just made a short film, art film version of it that will be up on YouTube very soon. Ours doesn't have any doppelgangers, but Possession is a bit polarizing because it explores intense and somewhat graphic themes. So some people really love it, some people really hate it.
I'm in the latter. No, it's the only thing I'm going to say about Possession is that it's a really weird movie.
Yeah.
And we've watched a lot of really weird movies.
Yeah.
And this is up there.
Yeah. When it comes to doubles, this film is an example of the same actor playing multiple roles within the film as a way to illustrate vastly different personalities.
It's just like Eddie Murphy in The Nutty Professor.
It's nothing like that, but that's another example of an actor playing multiple roles within a film.
Or in Eddie Murphy in The Nutty Professor 2, The Clumps.
That's really what it's called?
Yes.
Oh, interesting.
It's classified as a comedy romance. That movie only has 27% of Rotten Tomatoes. That's a classic.
But anyway, subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you'll be the first to know when our version of Possession comes out soon. A few other films I'm going to just list that we didn't talk about. Perfect Blue from 1997, Lost Highway, also from 97, Enemy from 2013, The Broken from 2008, Moon from 2009.
I know that movie.
The Similars from 2015, Look Away from 2018, and The Hole in the Ground from 2019.
You prepped me before this episode, being like, you're going to have to talk about Moon because I haven't seen it.
What do you have to say about Moon?
It absolutely has doppelgangers.
Clones? Where would you classify it? Which category?
Clones.
Okay, so off topic.
No. I'm sorry. You can't talk about Moon without giving the whole thing away.
Okay, that's the struggle of this whole episode that I found is like, yeah. I feel like the whole time I was like, oh, here's this great movie. I don't want to tell you exactly what happens, but go watch it, but you live and you learn.
I'm not going to say that Moon is an incredible movie, but it's interesting and I remember it.
I love Sam Rockwell, so.
Yeah, he does a great job in this movie.
Support him no matter what. I've seen Moon, to be fair, but I don't remember a doppelganger moment. I don't remember much about it.
It's worth a watch. Yeah. It's a fun movie. It's a little, I just love space movies.
Yeah.
Like literally anything that takes place in space, I'll watch. Contact, very little of it takes place in space.
But some of it does.
Some of it does. But you put the whole movie in space.
Then you have a whole different movie.
Then sure. But like that, then I'm on board. Very classic sci-fi.
Yeah.
Not enough is in space.
Yeah.
Too much is like on the weird planets. Not about the weird planets. I'm all about being in space. Okay.
We have different thoughts. I guess that's canon.
Yes.
We are, in fact, not clones of each other.
That is correct. And it'd be really weird if he wasn't.
In conclusion, if it wasn't abundantly clear already, there are so many different reasons doubles are used in literature and film. But this quote from Catherine Bowers really seems to sum up the majority of these examples. We're going to let her take us home here. Quote, The double's appearance is usually terrifying because it's the manifestation of the social encounter feared most, one in which the authentic self is revealed. Suddenly, faced with your own mirror image, dark secrets are no longer buried, but potentially on display. If you can observe them, so can others. The terror lies in your double revealing your own hidden true self, perhaps even worse, a self hidden even to you." End quote. And at the end of the day, like we said, it's all about human nature.
Yeah, so I don't know about you, but I'm pretty inspired to go do a quick revisit to both Siebenkoss and The Sixth Day.
There you go. And Midnight Cowboy.
Sure,
Just throw that in there too.
Why not?
Why not? Thank you guys, as always, so much for being here. I know this was kind of a sprawling, weird one, even though I feel like I say this every episode. Join us next time for a Lunatics library featuring 3 incredible modern versions of doppelganger horror. I'm so excited for next episode. And as always, stay spooky and stay safe, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like some bonus content, consider supporting us on Patreon to access our patron-exclusive podcast, Horror Movie Club.
Also, head to lunaticsproject.com to check out our spooky merch and apparel.
You can find us at Lunatics Project on Twitter and TikTok, and The Lunatics Project on Instagram and YouTube, where you'll find our short horror films, cemetery tours, and so much more.
And please rate and review. A little feedback goes a long way to help us grow and get more content out there.
Our cover art is by Pilar Kep, and musical bumpers are by Michaela Papa and Jordan Moser.